Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to RoahmMythrill 3, and it's time for the judge commentary on the last two stages we just went through. Though first, there is something I need to point out. After recording, I went back into this stage just to get rid of the checkpoint that was set when I went back for the second token. I just like to have those things cleaned up. It's probably an OCD kind of thing. But anyway, as soon as I went into the stage, I got a notification that I unlocked a new border, Box Cartel, which, if memory serves, that has something to do with another of the Make a Good Mega Man contests. I'm not sure which one, but I remember the subject coming up before, I think with a plushie. But anyway, obviously I play windowed mode, so I can't really show off the borders. I do windowed mode so that I can have my editing background where I show the stats for each stage as I'm playing through them. And the other thing is, well, I have no idea what I did to unlock it. I just got the message saying that I got the new border, and it happened as soon as I entered the stage, so I don't know if it's going through a certain number of teleporters or what. So I talked with my friends about it, and she suggested it might be overall playtime. While playing the last couple of stages, my overall playtime for my file went over 24 hours, which evidently the Box Cartel came from a 24-hour level design contest. So that would make sense. Others checked the wiki for RoahmMythrill 3, but not much info could be found there about it, so we'll go with that one. But anyway, 152nd place, Cutman's New Warehouse, 36.4 out of 100. This stage got a 2 in difficulty, 10.6 in design, 7.4 in fun, 2.8 in creativity, 6.2 in aesthetics, and 9.4 in functionality. Mick, an attempt to revitalize Cutman's level? I can see the idea if nothing else, but for the purposes of the contest, this was flawed from the outset, as ideally you'd make something that's more your own thing. Putting aside the creativity weaknesses, this warehouse has a ton of enemies and no idea what to do with half of them. I counted 17 different types of enemies here, and the only ones that consistently stuck out as semi-interesting were the supercutters and flying shells. The Sozis were a little different from normal, but mostly because they were placed in odd spots that made it harder to tell where they'd actually move. Everything else is simple challenges against a largely drab gray, which is neither fun nor even that well designed. The aesthetic in particular is a sticking point with me. I get that Cutman's tiles can be awkward to work with, but those indents exist on his tile set because a pure gray wall isn't interesting to look at. It's not actually that bad at the start, which coincides with the level's stronger efforts to be interesting, but as the aesthetic takes a dive, so too does everything else. Considering we're talking about Mega Man 1 aesthetics, this managed to be especially weak. I'll give credit to the token rooms and the flying shell implementation. Those were actually kind of fun. The rest of it, though, this needs work for sure. I'd suggest picking a smaller selection of enemies and finding ways to adjust their scenarios through terrain or grouping. Quality over quantity, that's my advice. Shinryu. This is a very lacking level, to put it mildly. A lot of the enemies are placed in basic configurations that pose little to no threat, with some exceptions for the first few screens, and really most of it comes from the bladers. I can only really name two parts of the stage that stood out to me in some way. The small section with two Metools and a rotating supercutter, and the vertical section with respawning flying shells. Both of these require a more thoughtful approach and quick reactions from the player in order to get through unscathed, at least in comparison to the rest of the level. I feel this stage would have been a lot better if it had focused more on moments like that. What might have also helped is if the gimmicks had a greater presence here. Guts lifts, drop platforms, and a single footholder only appear for one section each before swiftly disappearing for good. It makes me wonder if there were more sections meant to include these gimmicks, but were never finished. Now that I think about it, that's a good way to sum up this stage. It feels unfinished. Nowhere is that more exemplified than in the backgrounds. What happened to the details here? Aside from drop shadows below the ceilings, the background is almost always a flat shade of gray once you get halfway through. In short, if this had more sections like the ones featuring the flying shells of the supercutter, then this probably would have turned out to be a pretty decent stage. As it is now, it's just very bland. Patchy. Out with the old, in with the old? It's a remix stage, I guess. More appropriately would be a reimagining stage. Or rather, it's just a stage that happened to be featuring Cutman elements as well as some others. It does some neat things like making the 8-way shot enemies relevant to the stage layout, but otherwise mostly just resembles the original Cutman stage with not much added in, such as the octopus batteries or shield attacker barely putting up any threats. However, one major difference from the original stage is that this is no longer really beginner-friendly with the additional, more complicated gimmicks. That is the main problem I have for this stage. and I'm really not sure what the goal of this is. Is it trying to expand on using the existing stage as a base? Create a hard mode version of the stage? The guts lifts are a bit annoying in a sense that they don't really sync with each other, so you end up with times where you have to wait on the same platform to cycle through until the next platform is in a better spot. Yeah, I got hit with that a few times. There's also a long stretch of the level that's just a gray background, which is not really aesthetically pleasing and uncannily resembles a default Game Maker room. Kinda does now that you mention it. And a random lone footholder that is just there. Hey, I have trauma with footholders, so I'll take that. 10 things off is a regular unmodified Cutman fight. It is just not really that exciting, and just further conflicts with whatever vision this entry was going for. Flashman 85. I would expect a fresh take on Cutman to take place at a lumber mill with log and buzzsaw gimmicks, or incorporate the scissor enemies from Mega Man 9 and Challenger from the future, or merge ideas from the NES, Game Boy, and powered-up versions. I assume this level attempts the latter, but it's hard to tell. The pleasant music, perfectly serviceable graphics, and disappointingly unremarkable boss fight are the only obvious ties to Cutman. I see a number of assets that have appeared in at least one official version of Cutman's level. However, I see many additional assets that don't seem to fit. A lack of focus is the big issue here. We don't need two similar styles of moving platform and two similar styles of Sniper Joe. There are enough enemy types without throwing Baton and Squirm into the mix. Footholder and Yoku blocks might as well not be there. Forget how everything connects to Cutman, I barely understand how one screen connects to the next. Without a clear gameplay theme or sense of meaningful challenge progression, this feels like a general Mega Man 1 remix run amok. A few screens show some promise. The Mets Halls right before the first Guts platform are fine. Beak and Crash platform is decent, and Flying Shell and Drop platform is nice and tricky. Most everything else is messy, uninteresting, or familiar to a fault. The room with 3 progressively easier Mega Man 2 Sniper Joes blocking hallways and guarding ladders hurts my soul. If you clear out all the moving parts, the structure is pretty sturdy. The architecture is acceptable, with only one glaring flaw. Hello, gaping pit where there should be a section divider. Importantly, checkpoints are the right distance apart. Aside from a major redesign of everything challenge-related, a couple power-ups are all the place really needs. And Ace Spark. This stage is, obviously enough, an attempted remake of one of the more basic stages of the original game, and in an attempt to flesh out the stage, the final result is a grab bag of generic assets and enemies placed with such frequency that there's never any time to breathe. The most of these enemies are incredibly tedious to kill removes any sense of flow that the original Cutman stage had. While I understand why you're using the original tile set, the first game's backgrounds have aged poorly, and as a result, unless you expand and innovate on them, the result is a fairly lifeless and ugly stage, especially the significant amount of bright blank background. I always kind of wondered what the original Cutman stage was supposed to look like. I mean, first game syndrome and all, but yeah, it didn't really fit a timber felling robot. The rooms with Crashman platforms were used quite intelligently, and I do not mind the hidden offshoots with tokens, although a clearer visual cue for the second would have been nice. Honestly, I enjoyed the original 1987 stage more. So, yeah, overall, this is a serviceable enough stage. It's okay, but definitely could use some tightening up. I didn't realize there were a total of 17 different enemy types there, so the fact that I didn't remember that many being there, I think that does kind of talk to the maybe too many were used, but not really in interesting ways. I do still think it's a little bit strange that the easier path to get to on the Guts lifts was the secret, whereas you had to go down the harder path with the desynced platform to actually progress the stage. That still feels a little off to me, but your mileage may vary. So overall, it's a decent enough stage, just needs some tightening up. And so now, 151st place, Disobedience of Superior Machines by Shimon11. This stage got a 4.8 in difficulty, 12.2 in design, 5.6 in fun, 6.6 in creativity, 4.6 in aesthetics, and 8 in functionality. Mick. I don't know what I was expecting when I opened that monitor, but it certainly wasn't what I got. Double jump? Okay, that's cool, very base. Increased movement speed. I've enjoyed speed-based levels before. Decreased respawn time. Wait, why is that necessary? Yeah, I think that hit me too. All enemies get a significant power and speed boost? Yeah, that didn't bode well at all. To be blunt, I don't like this level, I really don't. My first playthrough, I absolutely hated it, but nowadays I just plain old dislike it. The boosted mobility is fun, and the increased respawn time is an appreciated level of consideration, but dear goodness the level of spikes and heavy damage in this place. The end result is beyond the bounds of what most Mega Man games call acceptable difficulty. It's less of a good Mega Man level and more of a bad Kaizo level. The token rooms and the Metal Man fight are the best examples of that notion. The tokens were a very literal difficulty spike. One slight twitch too far and you can end up resetting, and after 20 some odd resets on the same room, I was just kinda done with it. As for Metal Man, I'm not convinced it's possible to beat him without taking damage. His bullet hell seems to lack some finesse. But why a bad Kaizo level specifically? Well, my understanding of Kaizo is that it's more than just annoyingly hard. It's clever and cheeky in how it makes you want to scream. This level is neither clever nor particularly cheeky. The puzzle designs are pretty basic, and sections dedicated purely to combat border on mindless boss fights being the exception. Combined with bland sky visuals and a song whose intro rapidly gets grating, the only thing that really landed with me was the respawn time. Everything else, this needs to go back to the drawing board. Shinryu. The general idea of this level is fine. Small sections involving weapon challenges with things like increased speed or jump height can make for some fun gameplay. Unfortunately, that's not really the case with this stage. The biggest issue here is that most of the challenges aren't particularly interesting. If anything, I actually found most of them to be pretty boring. There's a few that managed to stand out, such as the laser and ice wall setup, along with the break dash segment. Even with a faster speed and double jump, though, most of these challenges just didn't stand out to me. Some of them, like the Thunder Beam and Water Shield sections, only focus on the bare minimum of what the weapons are capable of. A lot of the weapons have some form of unique interactions, like how Thunder Beam can power certain gimmicks, or how Water Shield can put out fires, so to not even see those aspects acknowledged in a stage like this is a little disappointing. The token rooms, meanwhile, have a different problem. They're way too difficult. The precision required to get through most of them is nothing short of ridiculous. Granted, I like the fact that they're always at the start of segments where checkpoints are located. That combined with a quicker respawn rate does alleviate the frustration factor a bit, but it doesn't exactly change the fact that most of these rooms are overly brutal. Hearing the first few seconds of the music over and over again after each death didn't really help things either. Lastly, there's the two modified dev kit bosses to contend with. Splash Woman is at least tolerable despite her increased firing rate. Metal Man, however, is just inexcusable. The Toho-styled bullet hell attacks wouldn't be so bad if not for his damage output, which is enough to kill you in roughly 4 or so hits. It's a pretty frustrating climax to a stage with a nice concept, but a fumbled execution. Patchy. Time to proceed in a moderately quicker state of maneuvering. I think the creator took a peek at escape sequence in Magmental 2, noticed the gimmick of making Mega Man super stacked in mobility, and proceeded to create a stage here with a similar premise. But the catch is, here it requires severely precise platforming. It kinda doesn't really work in the context of a contest, because the player isn't going to be used to the sudden increase in their movement after going through tons of other stages. There's no music here. It's only the first 10-second loop of it because you're gonna keep getting insta-killed by everything and have the room reset constantly. I mean, points where they're due. It is merciful that the death animation is omitted completely, but I'd rather the platforming challenges were not made so incredibly strict that they lead to this many deaths to begin with. A lot of the fun of going fast just whittles away really quickly when the stage is actively designed in ways to prevent it. Just to put it in a picture of how precise these jumps can be, there exist mini spikes for crying out loud. Then comes Metal Man. Yeah, let's also make his fight a bullet hell mess, never mind the fact that the increased mobility makes a very huge detriment to slipping through the tiny gaps between bullets. No focus mode to help you here. Oh, and he has a desperation attack too, because of course. Just tank through the fight. Flashman 85. I know there's an audience for fast-paced, puzzle-oriented, precision-driven gameplay, but I also know that players need time to adjust to new concepts and mechanics. The adjustment period here is not unlike the one you'd have after falling asleep in kindergarten and waking up at the controls of an airplane. With no warm-ups or practice exercises, success relies entirely on a combination of pre-existing expertise, excessive trial and error, and dumb luck. Accelerating the respawn process is considerate, but it's no substitute for fair and balanced level design. Simply eliminating the increased movement speed would have made this far more manageable, and nudged it away from the fringes of how much modification is too much for this contest. At least the segments are short and separated by checkpoints, there's infinite ammo, and Joes are used purely for atmosphere. The level may be grueling, but it's not cruel. The graphics have a lot of character, but rely too heavily on a scrolling background for interest. The music fits well and progresses nicely from main theme to boss theme, but dying means restarting the music, which means gradually going insane from listening to the first two measures on repeat. A misplaced Geary, sudden access to the Buster after respawning, and Water Shield's conspicuous inability to absorb boss projectiles sully the technical polish. I'm not a fan of the boss, but Breakdash mitigates the pain. The worst parts are the pixel-perfect never want to do this again Spark Chaser and Water Shield tokens. The best parts are the ones that creatively explore what these special weapons can do. Ice Wall and Breakdash are the standouts, but there are clever moments with Tornado Blow, Laser Trident, and Magnet Beam as well. This level tries to shout extreme, but it comes out as I have too many ideas and not enough of them work. And A-Spark. Despite the nature of this stage, I don't dislike it. It has its moments and highlights and doesn't really get into the realm of frustrating. It's almost entirely instant death, that is the idea. The time between dying and respawning is basically nullified, and that goes a long way to making this stage playable. And I definitely like some of these segments. The Ice Wall, Breakdash, and to a lesser extent the Tornado Blow segment are creative and feel very satisfying to best. But the stage is quantity over quality, and so many of the areas come down to uncreative, just kill these mini-bosses with a weapon, Lamau. The Magnetic Shockwave segment is about the worst for this. By trying to shoehorn every weapon in, you have a stage with serious nothing going on half the time. My first time playing, back when judging first started, I found the tokens pretty frustrating. This is one of the last stages I ended up reviewing last, though, and I didn't get that same feeling. Not sure how to count this one. I guess I understood what these were going for pretty quickly this time. I did not like how the ability to double jump was introduced. It feels really lazy to just shove the explanation off in a sign, and heaven help if the player misses that. The boss fight against Metal Man was just bad. Oof, man. If there's an intended strategy for reliably dodging his shots, I just don't see it. Here's weakness, down an E-Tank, finish. If I had one absolutely worst aspect to this level, it's from an aesthetic standpoint. Yes, it's rather ugly, and the weird resizing bugs me in a major way, but that's not what I'm talking about. Whilst you are good at minimizing downtime, you forgot an important detail. Oh my god, the music resets? I have no idea if the track is any good. Barely a few minutes in, I had to mute it. Good god, that was so obnoxious. In the end, this stage is basically trying to merge two Mag Mammal 2 stages, Identity Crisis and Escape Sequence, and failing to live up to either. Reading the judge commentary, I have to wonder if, with the Metal Man fight, if none of them realized that his rate of fire was dependent upon yours. It's something I honestly should have thought to have tried earlier because it's how the original Metal Man works to a degree. The original Metal Man will not react until you fire, then he will jump to one of his 3 pre-programmed heights, and depending on how high he jumps, he will throw 1, 2, or 3 metal blades your way. But at that point, he is locked into what he is doing. He can't change his routine. This version of Metal Man can. When you fire, he will jump and he will shoot 1 bullet if you fire once. However, even while in midair, if you shoot multiple times, he will shoot more, and it quickly turns into Danmaku craziness. But if you limit your shots, and especially if you're just letting Spark Chaser do some work, the final boss really isn't all that bad. Now, the Desperation attack, I'm still not really sure how to get around all of that, but the rest of the fight honestly isn't too terribly bad once you know that. Overall, I kind of enjoyed this stage more than I thought I would. Did I die a lot? Absolutely. Does some of the precision get kind of frustrating? Yes. But I didn't have as bad a time with this stage as I thought I would. It took a bit, but not nearly as long as the previous videos with Hunter Tower. This was very fast-paced in a way that I did kind of enjoy. I will say I don't feel like doubling Mega Man's speed, or however much they upped it. I don't feel like that really added to the experience, other than making platforming trickier. Because yes, adjusting to faster speed did make getting on some of the tiny platforms a bit problematic. But the rest of the stage, where it would be nice to have that extra speed, you don't really get to enjoy it too much. So, there is that. And I will agree that it feels like something more organic should have been in play to make the double jump mechanic come across. Like, if the sign was right before a tall jump that you had to do a double jump to get over, that would make sense. Instead, the sign is right before a one-way gate. So yes, if you just go past it, and didn't read it, then you might not know you have a double jump. I mean, eventually you might figure it out, but you don't have the sign to go back to. Normally, I am a proponent of, if they missed reading the sign, that's their own fault, but I will say, make it more solidly accessible to where it isn't this one-way thing that you can pass it before actually reading it, and then you need to have read it to move on. But other than that, this stage was actually pretty okay. I honestly had a fairly fun time with it. But with that, thank you very much for watching, I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well. And chainsaw, 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 chainsaw!